Man and the Scarecrow. In the vast fields under the deep night sky, Mr. Hui's house stood alone, like an old friend forgotten by time. The dark sky was heavy, with only a faint silver moon piercing through thick clouds, casting a pale light on the ground, creating eerie shadows around the house. The cold winds whispered through the fields, carrying the sound of rustling leaves and the occasional chirp of insects in the stillness. The small house sat isolated in the expansive space, resembling a relic that survived the ravages of time. Each weathered wooden plank, each rusty nail clinging to the structure, told the story of years gone by, while time layered dust upon everything, turning the house into a scene of haunting melancholy. The walls, once vibrant, now dulled with age, exuded an eerie stillness that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who dared approach, a sense that they were stepping into another realm, a place not belonging to the ordinary world. Outside on the porch, Mr. Hui sat on an old wooden chair, his gaze lost in the vastness ahead. His entire being seemed engulfed by the misty veil of the dark night. Dressed in a thick coat, he still felt the chill of the air penetrating his skin, not from the atmosphere but from the deep-seated loneliness and emptiness he had endured since his beloved wife passed away. Memories of her flooded his mind like a faded film, an obsession of sorrow that he could not shake off. He vividly recalled every detail, her gentle smile, her warm gaze, and the soft, loving tone of her voice. They had built a life together in this very place, nurturing it bit by bit. From the tiniest possessions in the house to the small garden outside. Every day, she would sit beneath the apple tree in their backyard, reading or humming traditional folk songs. That image remained etched in his mind, an indelible mark of their shared love. The apple tree, once a symbol of love and hope, now stood skeletal and barren, stripped of its leaves, standing alone against the night sky. The harsh winters had killed off its branches, leaving it a lifeless shell, much like his heart. In the field, the Scarecrow stood silently among the dry grass, his thin arms raised, wearing a tattered hat. It had been there since the days when his wife was still alive. She would joke that it was Uncle Scarecrow, and sometimes she would laugh, telling him to talk to it as if it were a friend during the times when she was away. Back then, he only chuckled off her jokes, dismissing it as childish banter. But now, when everything around him was enveloped in silence, he felt as if the Scarecrow was indeed watching him, accompanying him in his endless solitude, especially on nights like this Halloween, when it was rumored that the boundary between the living and the dead became the thinnest. Mr. Hui was not someone who believed in superstitions, but loneliness and the painful memories seemed to make him see things that ordinary folks could not. The Scarecrow's eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to emit an eerie glow, as if it were observing every movement he made. Occasionally, he felt as if it wanted to speak to him, but all that greeted him was silence. As the night deepened, the moon rose high, illuminating the dark sky with a faint glow, casting shadows that danced eerily. Mr. Hui remained there, quietly gazing at the Scarecrow, his eyes blurring from the memories of love and loss. Sometimes, he felt like he could hear his wife's voice whispering to him from somewhere. He turned his head, but all he found was the enveloping darkness. He told himself it was just an illusion, that she was gone forever, but his heart could not abandon the fragile hope that someday she would return. Then, just when everything seemed to fade into utter silence, a sound came from the Scarecrow. Mr. Hui jumped, his eyes wide, fixed on it. The Scarecrow seemed to shift, one of its thin arms slowly lowering, as if beckoning him. Hui approached the Scarecrow, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Perhaps, at last, he would find the answers to the haunting questions that had plagued him for so long. He drew near, his gaze locked on the Scarecrow, and in that moment, he saw clearly. The Scarecrow's eyes glimmered in the darkness, reminiscent of a living being's gaze. A chill swept through him, and suddenly, he heard his wife's voice whispering softly in his ear. "My love, I'm always here, always by your side." Those words rendered him speechless, tears streaming down his cheeks, tracing a path down his weathered face. Looking back at the Scarecrow, he saw it standing still, as if nothing had ever happened. But deep inside, he knew that she was still with him, watching over him, caring for him in some way. From that Halloween night onward, there was a profound change within Mr. Huey. He no longer felt the cold pangs of loneliness as before, for he was convinced that his wife was near, even if only in the form of the simple Scarecrow standing amidst the barren field. Every morning, he would stand on the porch, gazing at the Scarecrow as if waiting for something, and as night fell, especially on those chilly nights, he would feel her presence lingering around him. However, after Halloween, the strange occurrences around the Scarecrow intensified, becoming increasingly apparent, as if signs were manifesting that his wife was indeed present in his life. These signs began subtly, gently, almost imperceptibly, leading him to question whether they were real or merely illusions conjured by his longing. One morning, as he tended to the apple tree, he decided to see if the Scarecrow might give him a sign. He stood facing it and said, "If you are still here, please show me what is happening. Is there something I need to know?" He stood silently, waiting with hope and anxiety swirling within him. But nothing happened, only the sound of the wind whispering through the branches. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind swept through, causing the Scarecrow to sway gently as if it were responding to his question. Initially, Mr. Huey thought it might just be the wind or that he had misremembered the Scarecrow's position. But when he attempted to turn the Scarecrow back to its original position, the following morning, it had once again turned to face him. He felt a chill run down his spine, yet he wasn't afraid. Instead, he felt warmth, as if it were his wife communicating with him, reminding him that she was always watching over him. As days turned into weeks, the peculiar events became more frequent, quietly yet hauntingly. There were nights when he returned home after wandering the fields, admiring the night scenery, only to find a warm blanket draped neatly on the table, as if someone had prepared it for him ahead of time. Sometimes, the chair beside him would be slightly ajar, as if someone had just risen from it before he arrived. A familiar warmth hung in the air, making him almost hear her soft breath. Then one evening, he accidentally dropped his wedding ring on the floor, the same ring he and his wife had exchanged on their wedding day. Over the years, it had become loose and easily slipped off. Yet to him, it was the most precious relic he had left. Panicking, he searched high and low for it, but as the night wore on, he had to give up as it was late. The next morning, when he awoke, he found the ring perfectly placed on the table, glinting in the morning light as if it had never left his hand. Mr. Huey could not explain these occurrences. A part of him wanted to believe that it was magic from his wife, that she had returned to care for him in some way. But another part, the one filled with doubt and exhaustion from loneliness, insisted it was merely illusions born from his endless yearning. And thus, he lived within a conflict of emotions, a strange happiness at the thought of her still being there, and skepticism that kept nagging at him. Then one night, as he lay in bed, he heard a noise outside. This time, it wasn't just whispers but the sound of footsteps, as if many people were moving about. He grabbed his lantern, heart racing, and decided to step outside. The darkness enveloped him, only the dim light of his lantern illuminating a small patch of ground ahead. He walked toward the Scarecrow, and in the weak light, he saw several figures gathering around it. They stood silently, their expressions blank, their eyes vacant. Mr. Huey felt fear creep in, but a sense of curiosity also bloomed within him. He felt he was witnessing something extraordinary, yet terrifying. These figures were the spirits he had heard of. As he drew closer, the realization struck him. These were the souls seeking peace, each one bearing a tale of anguish and longing. Suddenly, one of the figures turned toward him. It was a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing, her pale face devoid of expression. "We have come here to seek the truth," the woman said, her voice a mere whisper carried by the wind. To seek the truth? Mr. Hui echoed, confusion clouding his mind. There is something wrong here, and we need your help. The soul cannot rest, she continued, her gaze piercing through him. Mr. Hui felt overwhelmed. Who were these people? Why had they come to him? What did they want from him? You are the only one who can hear our call, the woman stated, her voice now slightly more assertive. Is there any way I can help you? He asked, his heart heavy with compassion. Find justice for us. Free us from this pain, the woman whispered, and at that moment, a wave of urgency washed over Mr. Hui. From that night on, he was determined to uncover the truth. He began collecting stories from the villagers, probing into the past, seeking out the truths buried deep within the soil of his land. He visited the cemetery, where the departed lay in peace, each tombstone a testament to a life lived and a soul lost. Mr. Hui found himself wandering through the village, speaking to the elders who held the collective memory of the community. They spoke of families who had disappeared during storms, of a plague that ravaged the land, taking lives and leaving behind sorrow. He sought out Mrs. Tam again, pleading for her to share more about the area's history. There was once a thriving village here, she said, her tone somber, but a sickness swept through, taking many lives. They died in agony, and their souls could not find rest. A sense of dread swelled within Mr. Hui. He remembered the anxious expression of the woman from his dreams, the urgency in her words about seeking justice. Were the spirits reaching out for him? Were they trapped here, crying for help? Does anyone remember the names of those who have gone missing? He asked, grasping for clues. There are a few names lost to time, Mrs. Tam replied, but there's a story everyone tells about a family that disappeared one stormy night. They lived nearby, in a small house on the edge of the fields. It said their spirits still linger here. After their conversation, Mr. Hui resolved to seek out the old house Mrs. Tam had mentioned. He hoped to uncover more about the souls that wandered in unrest. The day was dim, the sky overcast, foretelling a coming storm. He followed a dirt path, gradually approaching the dilapidated house that had long been deserted. When he arrived, he was met with a sight of decay. The old house stood frail, its windows shattered, overgrown weeds surrounding it. The atmosphere was thick with foreboding, an oppressive sense that something dark loomed in the air. Stepping inside, he felt the air shift, heavy with moisture and despair. The weak light streaming through the broken windows created haunting shadows that seemed to move. Mr. Hui walked from room to room, his heart racing with anticipation. Suddenly, he heard a faint sound, like the cry of a child. He froze, straining to listen. The sound seemed to come from a dark corner, where a dusty old drawer lay forgotten. He moved cautiously toward it, hands trembling as he opened the drawer. Inside lay an old doll, his hair tangled and dress soiled with time. Despite its condition, the doll's eyes seemed to gleam with life. Mr. Hui felt a chill run down his spine, as if a spirit were seeking his help from deep within. He picked up the doll, and instantly, fleeting images flashed before his mind. He saw a little girl, about 6 years old, with a radiant smile, playing joyfully outside the house. Her bright eyes sparkled with innocence. But suddenly, the scene shattered. A violent storm hit, and she, along with her family, vanished into the dark. Mr. Hui shuddered, realizing this was the spirit of the missing girl that Mrs. Tam had mentioned. Was she trying to tell him something? Determined to learn more about the family, he returned to the village, seeking out those who could recall the past. He found an old man, wise with the knowledge of years, seated on a wooden bench in a cafe. Do you know about the family that went missing near the fields? Mr. Hui inquired. Oh, that's a sad story, the old man replied, his eyes clouding with sorrow. They lived there happily, but on a stormy night, they vanished. The villagers searched everywhere, but no trace was found. Does anyone know what happened to them? Mr. Hui pressed. Legend has it that a malevolent spirit claimed that house, trapping those who lived there. Many say that on bright full moon nights, you can hear cries and calls for help from that house. A chill ran through Mr. Hui. Mrs. Tam's warnings resonated in his mind, foreboding the dangers lurking in his explorations. He resolved to delve deeper into the past, hoping that it would unlock the mysteries surrounding the souls seeking justice. That night, as the hours passed, Mr. Hui once again heard noises outside. This time, however, it wasn't just whispers, it was the sound of footsteps, as if many people were moving around. Grabbing his flashlight, his heart raced. He stepped outside. The world outside was pitch black, illuminated only by the dim beam of his flashlight. He moved toward the Scarecrow, and then, in the weak light, he saw multiple figures gathered around it. They stood silently, unmoving, their vacant stares staring into the void. After a strange encounter with the mysterious figures, Mr. Hui felt a surge of determination to uncover the truth of what was happening around the fields and the restless souls. He started gathering stories from the villagers, searching for old tales that could shed light on the lost spirits. He visited Mrs. Tam once more, imploring her to share more about the area's history. Mrs. Tam listened carefully as he recounted the strange occurrences, the dreams, and the spirits he had witnessed. There was once a large village here, she began, her voice low, but a plague swept through, taking many lives. They died in pain, and their souls cannot find peace, forever wandering this field. A wave of dread washed over Mr. Hui. He recalled the anxious expression of the woman from his dream and her words about seeking justice. Were those souls looking for help from him? Does anyone remember the names of those who have gone missing? He asked, seeking clues. There are a few names lost to time, Mrs. Tam responded. But there is a tale everyone tells about a family that vanished during a fierce storm. They lived not far from here, in a small house at the edge of the fields. People say their souls linger here. After the conversation with Mrs. Tam, Mr. Hui decided to find the old house she mentioned. He hoped to uncover more about the restless spirits. The day was grim, the sky overcast, as if warning of an impending storm. He followed the dirt road, slowly approaching the abandoned house that had seen no visitors for a long time. When he arrived, he was met with a scene of desolation. The old house stood weak, its windows shattered, weeds growing wildly. The atmosphere was heavy, filled with a sense of unease. Stepping inside, the musty smell overwhelmed him, and shadows danced in the dim light filtering through the broken windows. Mr. Hui moved from room to room, his heart racing with anticipation. Suddenly, he heard a faint sound, almost like a child's cry. He stopped, straining to listen. The sound came from a dark corner where an old drawer lay forgotten. He cautiously approached it, hands trembling as he opened the drawer. Inside, he found an old doll, his hair tangled and dressed dirty. Despite its condition, the doll's eyes seemed to shimmer eerily. Mr. Hui felt as if a spirit were reaching out, pleading for his help from within the doll. As he grasped the doll, images flooded his mind. He saw a girl, about 6 years old, with a bright smile, playing happily outside the house. Her innocent eyes sparkled, but suddenly, the scene was shattered. A ferocious storm struck, and she and her family vanished into darkness. A shiver coursed through Mr. Hui, realizing this was the spirit of the missing girl that Mrs. Tam had mentioned. Was she trying to communicate something important to him? Determined to uncover more about the family, he returned to the village, speaking to elders who might recall past tales. He found an old man, wise and weathered, sitting on a wooden bench in a cafe. "Do you know about the family that went missing near the fields?" Mr. Hui asked. "Oh, that's a sad tale," the old man replied, his gaze drifting. "They lived there happily, but one stormy night, they disappeared without a trace. People searched everywhere, but no clues were found. Does anyone know what might have happened to them?" Mr. Hui pressed. "Legend says a malevolent spirit took that house, trapping those who lived there. Many claim that on full moon nights, you can hear cries and calls for help from the house. Mr. Hui felt chills run down his spine. Mrs. Tam's warnings echoed in his mind, foretelling dangers in his explorations. He resolved to dig deeper into the past, hoping it would reveal the secrets of the souls seeking justice. One fateful night, as hours dragged on, he once again heard noises outside. But this time, it wasn't just whispers, it was footsteps, a multitude of people moving around. Grabbing his flashlight, his heart raced as he stepped outside. The night enveloped him in darkness, illuminated only by the dim light from his flashlight. As he walked toward the Scarecrow, he noticed several figures gathering around it, standing silently, their eyes vacant, gazing into nothingness. Encounter with the souls. After the strange encounter with the mysterious figures, Mr. Hui felt compelled to delve deeper into the events surrounding the fields and the restless spirits. He began collecting stories from the villagers, seeking out ancient tales that could provide insight into the lost souls. He found Mrs. Tam once more, begging her to share more about the history of the area. Mrs. Tam listened intently as he recounted the unusual phenomena, the dreams, and the spirits he had encountered. There was once a large village here, she began, her voice heavy, but a plague swept through, taking many lives. They died in pain, and their souls cannot find peace, forever wandering this land. A swell of anxiety rose within Mr. Hui. He recalled the worried expression of the woman in his dream and her words about seeking justice. Were these spirits trying to reach out for his assistance? Does anyone remember the names of those who went missing? He asked, searching for clues. There are a few names forgotten over time, Mrs. Tam replied. But there is one tale everyone tells about a family that vanished during a fierce storm. They lived nearby, in a small house on the edge of the fields. People say their spirits still linger here. After their conversation, Mr. Hui resolved to seek out the old house Mrs. Tam mentioned. He hoped to find clues about the restless spirits. The day was gloomy, the sky overcast, as if forewarning of an impending storm. He followed the dirt path, gradually making his way toward the dilapidated house. Long abandoned, upon arriving, he was greeted by a scene of ruin. The old house stood frail, its windows shattered, weeds growing wildly. The atmosphere was heavy, filled with a sense of foreboding. Stepping inside, he was met with a musty smell that overwhelmed him, and shadows danced in the dim light that filtered through the broken windows. Mr. Hui wandered from room to room, his heart racing with anticipation. Suddenly, he heard a faint sound, almost like a child's cry. He froze, straining to listen. The sound came from a dark corner where an old drawer lay forgotten. He cautiously approached it, his hands trembling as he opened the drawer. Inside, he found an old doll, his hair tangled and dressed dirty. Despite its condition, the doll's eyes seemed to glimmer with a strange light. Mr. Hui felt as if a spirit were reaching out for help from within the doll. As he grasped the doll, images flooded his mind. He saw a girl, about 6 years old, with a radiant smile, playing joyfully outside the house. Her bright eyes sparkled with innocence. But suddenly, the scene shattered. A violent storm hit, and she, along with her family, vanished into darkness.
Mr. Hui shook the.
Realizing this was the spirit of the missing girl that Mrs. Tam had mentioned. Was she trying to tell him something? Determined to uncover more about the family, he returned to the village, seeking out elders who might recall the tales of the past. He found a wise, aged man sitting on a wooden bench in a cafe. Do you know about the family that went missing near the fields? Mr. Hui inquired. Oh, that's a sorrowful tale. The old man replied, his eyes clouded with sadness. They lived there happily, but one stormy night, they disappeared without a trace. The villagers searched for them, but no sign was ever found. Does anyone know what might have happened to them? Mr. Hui pressed. Legend has it that a malevolent spirit claimed that house, trapping those who lived there. Many say that on bright moonlit nights, you can hear cries and pleas for help from the house. A chill raced down Mr. Huey's spine. The warnings of Mrs. Tam echoed ominously in his mind, foreshadowing the dangers that lay ahead. He resolved to dig deeper into the past, hopeful that the secrets of the restless souls would be revealed. That night, as hours dragged on, he once again heard noises outside. But this time, it wasn't just whispers, it was the sound of footsteps, as if many people were moving around. Grabbing his flashlight, his heart raced as he stepped outside. The world outside was enveloped in darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of his flashlight. He moved toward the Scarecrow, and in the dim light, he saw several figures gathered around it. They stood silently, their expressions blank, their eyes vacant. The encounter with the spirits. Mr. Huey felt an inexplicable connection to these spirits, as if they were drawing him into their story. "Are you here for a reason?" he called out, his voice steady despite the quaking of his heart. The figures began to shift, their expressions still blank but their presence growing stronger. "We seek justice." One of them, a woman dressed in white, replied, "We were taken from our homes, our lives interrupted, our souls trapped in this realm. What can I do to help you?" Mr. Huey asked, a mix of fear and determination coursing through him. "Find the truth of our disappearance. Only then will we be free," she urged, her voice a haunting echo that resonated with his heart. Realizing the weight of their request, Mr. Huey nodded resolutely. "I will uncover the truth, I promise you." As he stepped back, the figures began to fade, disappearing into the shadows from whence they came. But their eyes lingered, a reminder of the unresolved tales that wove through the fabric of the land. The following days were filled with a newfound purpose for Mr. Huey. He spent countless hours researching the village's history, seeking out anyone who might hold the key to the past. He felt a sense of urgency in his quest, knowing that the spirits depended on him to unravel the mystery that bound them to this realm. He spoke to the elders, who shared tales of the village's darker past, of families who vanished without a trace during storms, of strange lights that flickered across the fields at night, and of whispers carried by the wind. Every story painted a clearer picture, linking the souls of the lost to the land itself. Determined to bring peace to the spirits, Mr. Huey revisited the abandoned house. Armed with knowledge and a plan, he entered the creaking door, a sense of purpose filling his heart. As he navigated through the dark rooms, he felt the air change, thick with anticipation. He stood before the old doll once more, recalling the images that had flooded his mind. "You were here," he murmured, "but I will find a way to set you free." He knelt beside the doll and closed his eyes, focusing on the energy surrounding him. "If you are here, guide me to the truth," he whispered, his heart racing. Suddenly, the room grew colder, a chill enveloping him. He opened his eyes and gasped. The shadows coalesced into a figure. The spirit of the little girl stood before him, her eyes pleading. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "You can help us." With newfound resolve, Mr. Huey followed the spirit as she led him deeper into the house. To a hidden cellar door, he hesitated for a moment, the air thick with dread, but the girl's gentle encouragement gave him strength. As he descended into the darkness, the air grew damp and cold. The musty scent of decay surrounded him, but he pressed on, the light of his lantern flickering as he moved deeper into the shadows. At the bottom of the stairs, he found an old wooden chest, its surface adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Mr. Huey's heart raced as he reached for the latch, knowing that within this chest lay the key to understanding the tragic fate of the family. With a firm grip, he opened the chest, revealing old letters and photographs, each one a fragment of a forgotten past. He carefully examined them, piecing together the story of a family torn apart by tragedy, a storm that had claimed them and a spirit that had trapped them. Through these artifacts, he could feel their pain, their cries for justice resonating in his soul. "I will share your story," he vowed, a promise to the spirits who had guided him. "I will not let your voices go unheard." As he emerged from the cellar, the night sky shimmered with stars, the air feeling lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Mr. Hui returned to the village, determined to tell the story of the lost family and the spirits that lingered, seeking justice and closure, a journey of redemption. From that night on, Mr. Hui dedicated his life to honoring the memories of those lost in the storm. He organized gatherings, sharing the stories of the village's past and bringing the community together. He spoke of the spirits who lingered, encouraging others to remember their names and acknowledge their presence. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere around the village began to change. The stories that had once been whispered in hushed tones were now told openly, the community embracing the history that had shaped their lives. As they came together, the bonds of connection grew stronger, a sense of unity igniting in their hearts. As the seasons changed, Mr. Hui felt a warmth surrounding him. He often visited the Scarecrow, still standing tall in the fields, as if guarding the memories of those lost. He would sit beside it, sharing stories of his life, reminiscing about his wife, and feeling her presence lingering near. On one such night, as he shared his thoughts with the Scarecrow, he felt a sudden rush of wind envelop him. The air crackled with energy, and he looked up, witnessing a mesmerizing dance of lights flickering around him. It was as if the spirits were celebrating, thanking him for his dedication. At that moment, he understood that love transcended even death. The bonds created through love and loss remained unbroken, a connection that time could never sever. The souls he had sought to help were now at peace, their stories woven into the very fabric of the land they had loved. And as he sat there, Mr. Hui felt a profound sense of purpose, knowing that he had not only given voice to the lost but had also found a way to heal his own heart. The path of redemption was not just for the spirits but also for himself, allowing him to embrace the beauty of life once more. The man and the Scarecrow stood together, guardians of memories, forever intertwined in the tale of love, loss, and redemption that would echo through the ages. Open ending. The story of Mr. Hui continues, as the strange occurrences and the souls might return. But now he is ready to face them, with a heart filled with hope and love. He knows that this life is not merely about existing, but about the journey to find meaning and connection with those who have departed. Will there be other souls awaiting help? Can he aid them? This journey will lead him to places unknown. But one thing is certain. Mr. Hui has discovered his purpose, to help the restless souls find peace and, in doing so, find tranquility for himself.